Hey, it's Tess, content creator, model, presenter, and host of the Tess Talks podcast, on a mission to ignite curiosity. Hey guys, welcome back to Tess Talks. Today I'm joined by Kelli Zacharoff. Kelli is an experienced midwife, an author, and an educator. I would say she is one of the most outspoken voices in Australia challenging our maternity system. Kelli has worked across public and private hospitals. She's also worked in private practice alongside OBGYNs, and she has worked as a home birth midwife and facilitator. She holds specialist qualifications with Kids Australia and SIDS, focusing on infant safety and safe co-sleeping practices, but she has also incredibly spent time working with Indigenous communities, educating families on pregnancy, birth, and early parenting. After decades in the system, Kelli reached a breaking point, an experience that led her to write her confronting book, The Midwife Crisis. It exposes the emotional toll on midwives and the systematic failures impacting women and babies every day. Today, we're talking home birth. We're talking cesarean's first vaginal birth. We're talking medicalisation of this industry. We're talking discussions to the current changes of the childhood vaccine schedule and what no one wants to say out loud about the modern maternity care system. This is an insightful conversation into the world of the amazing midwives around us, and it will challenge what you think you know about the institution, birth, and beyond. So let's get curious. It's a very unique angle.
It is.
You don't often hear.
You don't hear about it.
No. Well, I think there's so many.
9 times out of 10, we're kind of, we are a bit muzzled.
Yeah.
Health practitioners are a bit muzzled. You're not really allowed to say a lot. And
how so muzzled?
So our governing body, APRA.
Yeah.
So little things like there's social media things we're not allowed to post. We're not allowed to kind of give our opinions on certain things, vaccines or, those, drugs, those sorts of things we're not necessarily allowed to. So when I kind of first started out on the podcast, so there was a few moments where I was a bit like is this
like, am I accidentally going to say something, or have I released something that's a little like
have I kind of stepped over the mark here? And look, and I still have moments of like waiting for that phone call. And even with the book, I still have these moments that someone's going to call from APRA.
So how do they kind of monitor it? Like, do you have to sign something when you first become into the practice, or like what happens?
It's kind of part of our code of conduct, part of our standards of practice, those sorts of things. And those things have evolved. Like, I've been a registered midwife for 25 years, so social media was not around 25 years ago. So they've had to amend all of those requirements as kind of things have evolved. And look, and even things like, there are so many now midwives who have social media accounts, and this is how they've kind of gained their followers or gained their clients, but yet that kind of goes against the rules of engagement being a health practitioner.
I feel like all government bodies are really struggling to control this. Like it's the same within like the TGA and how they're monitoring all the like supplements that are coming out. And now I think they're cracking down on talking about Botox and different types of surgeries. Like they're trying to, I get it to a point, but you've got to let people communicate and share their experiences and talk about evolving science, so that we can improve.
And also, again, like talking about, things like your injectables and your Botox, that's how people gain business as well.
Yeah.
And that's how you become credible or not credible too. So again, like if you had a podcast or if you had a social media account that was able to give those comparisons or give those things that this isn't appropriate for pregnant women, then a pregnant woman would kind of go, okay, well, maybe I won't do that this month while I'm 39 weeks pregnant. I won't go and get my Botox.
Yeah.
But, I'll wait till I'm 6 weeks postpartum or whatever works for them. But it's really one of those things that, the control points are becoming almost too controlling way.
Putting my conspiracy hat on for a sec.
I love conspiracy.
How much of that in your field do you think is because they want to control the narrative about drugs and protect big pharma? Do you think that's super prevalent?
Yeah. And so prevalent in regards to, particularly when we talk about maternity care, women being in hospital and controlling that space of hospital is the safest place to have a baby. And for some people, it's not the safest place to have a baby, or it's not the safest place for someone to receive, healthcare. And you sort of, again, like you go back into sort of time and Indigenous kind of communities, they would refuse to go to hospital because it was always run by white people. So yes, absolutely. The narrative sometimes is more about the control aspect of keeping it all in that one space and everything kind of, and the risk compliance as well.
It's such an interesting space that I want to delve into a little bit more. And I love putting my conspiracy hat on too, although I actually hate that word because I feel like it's not even a conspiracy. It's like we're just trying to talk about,
we're just talking about it,
like our experiences, and the experience of people. So anyway, we'll get into all of that. But before we get there, we should probably tell the listeners a little bit about you and your background and your experience. Obviously, you and I met just over 12 months ago when Romy was born. You helped look after us when I was 7 days postpartum, when I was staying at home, which has now closed down, I believe. But Sean and I were lucky enough to spend 10 days there because we were in between homes, and you were there, I would say, most days. So you had a very active role in supporting me through my postpartum early days and also educating me on a lot of things because there are a lot of questions in those early days. So I feel like I learned a lot from you very, very quickly, and it's great that we've been able to stay connected and you've been able to see Romy as she's grown over her first year. So let's talk a little bit about how you got to that point. Like, where did you start? Where did you first get curious about midwifery?
Interesting question, Tess, because I actually, from a very, very early age, and I did write this in the book, apparently all of my Barbie dolls were always pregnant.
Oh my God.
My mother tells me this story. So she would come up to my room and hundreds of Barbie dolls, and most of them, if not all of them, had a cotton wool ball shoved up their dresses. And I had created hospitals and environments where these Barbie dolls were having babies. Now, mind you, there was no Ken doll at that point either. Ken just didn't exist back then. So
all the girls.
I know. All the girls, the women were just, they were just getting pregnant. So, so I guess I had this fascination with pregnancy very, very early on as a young child. I'm the eldest girl of 10 grandchildren in my family. So all of my aunts were always having babies, and I was always the babysitter, and I was always hanging out with the newborns and things like that. So I guess, and then as I got older and as my career evolved, actually began ultimately my career as a nanny. And even as an 18-year-old, I actually started a nanny agency.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurial from a very young age.
From a very young age. I started a nanny agency, and I was living in Canberra at the time, and it was the only ever nanny agency in Canberra at that time. And I ran that agency for about 4 years, sort of from my own home. And then I worked my grandmother had an office, and she gave me a space in her office, which was incredible. And then I actually sold that business to Dial and Angel.
Oh.
So Dial and Angel is if anyone knows Dial and Angel, it's kind of a multi faceted home care service.
Yeah.
It was run by an incredible woman called Dina Blackman.
Okay.
We came to the ripe old price of $30,000. So this was in 1992. And that was a lot of money for a 21-year-old, right? So I said, sure, I jumped at the chance. And the agreement was I then came on as the manager.
That's amazing to see how that same story or pattern has carried through your entire career life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it always has. So, and then after I had Louis, I had a really traumatic birth with Louis, which I do write about it in the book as well. And I then Darren and I sort of made some decisions. We weren't going to stay in Canberra. We're both born and bred in Canberra. We met in Canberra. And then we moved here to Melbourne. Louis was about 18 months old when we came here. And I actually, one of my first jobs that I ever got when we moved here was I actually worked in the arts building in the Melbourne Arts building with the tower.
Oh, yeah, the Arts Centre.
The Arts Centre,
yeah.
Sorry. I was the girl who planned the guys who changed the light bulbs in the spire.
Okay, bit of a career pivot.
I know, it was a weird career pivot. And then eventually I kind of went back to doing some nanny work while Billy was kind of fairly young. And one day I was walking him through the Carlton Gardens and I saw the Melbourne Exhibition Careers Expo happening. I walked in and there was a stand that was looking for the Bachelor of Midwifery students to start. It was the first time they'd started the Bachelor of Midwifery in Australia. And I walked up with my newborn in a pram and I said, well, what do I need to be a midwife? And they said, well, not much really. You can start. You don't have to be a nurse anymore. So I signed up on the spot. And while I was doing the degree, I just adored it. It was just incredible. Absolutely loved it. I loved every placement. It was hard work. It was really hard. And probably one of the hardest parts of it was that we weren't nurses. And we were kind of going into hospitals with that, I guess, the no knowledge of nursing, but incredible knowledge of women and women's health and what women were looking for and what women needed. And we were taught by the most incredible midwives in the country back then, the incredible Pat Brodie and the Nikki Leaps, and those of you midwives who are listening to this will know who these people are, and they're pretty prolific in the midwifery world, and they were teaching us about being midwives. So so we learnt from the ground up about what a midwife. We didn't have that nursing hat on.
How much do you think of your own story of having a traumatic birth with your first son influenced you to want to get into midwifery?
Well, I think that was one of the reasons why. I'd say 99% of the reason why I wanted to become a midwife was because I had a really traumatic experience. And I remember when I had Billy, my second child, I actually had him here at the Royal Women's. I actually had him at Francis Perry House with a private obstetrician. And I actually was assigned a student midwife during that labour and birth, and she was incredible.
Wow.
She was incredible. And I remember, funnily, I don't remember much of the birth because, again, it was another traumatic birth where I hemorrhaged, but I remember thinking, I want to be, that's what I want to do. I want to be a midwife like that. She held my hand and she touched me and she assured me that everything was going to be okay, and I wasn't going to nearly die again. But, she was incredible. And honestly, to this day, I don't remember her name. But there was something about her that just kind of, stuck with me.
Isn't it amazing the impact that midwives will have on women?
Yes.
And that's one thing that is very overlooked, that it is such a huge pivotal moment in a woman's life, giving birth, and that these people will, as you're saying, like, you will remember them forever, and they have the power to completely change your experience from being a negative one to a positive one, or vice versa. It's a huge responsibility.
It is. And I agree with you. It's so overlooked, that responsibility. And again, that's what I kind of really keep coming back to, particularly in my career and when I talk to other midwives now and student midwives. You have so much responsibility in your hand. You literally have 3 people's lives in your hands. And, they're not paid well. They're not cared for. They're not looked after. It's just assumed that you choose this, so you get on with it.
So you transitioned into public or private after you finished your bachelor?
So I started in public. So we had to do most of our practical work in the public system, but then I actually moved into a private system. So I worked in a couple of private hospitals. I worked in some birth centres. So I did quite a number of things, and I kind of have this, I guess I kind of leapfrogged a lot. I sort of probably spent 3 or 4 years in one place, and then I moved on. And it was, I now think back, incredible that I did that, but not intentionally. But I felt like I just needed more experience in different aspects. And I wanted to experience, working in private hospitals, working versus public hospitals versus, birth centres, and then NGOs. So I also worked in an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health service as well in Brisbane. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So what was the point for you that you then decided to transition into home birthing?
So I worked in a private hospital in Sunshine Coast, a beautiful private hospital that was very midwifery led, even though each woman that came to the hospital had a private obstetrician. But as midwives, we were kind of leading the care and looking after the women. We were doing water birth. And I met a number of midwives there who were kind of moonlighting in the home birth kind of scene. And I got really curious and sort of asked a few of them if I could come along and see what goes on and how does it work. So I did that. I think I saw about 4 or 5 births with some really incredible midwives. And it's like I got bitten badly. Like it was just, and I realized that this is actually where I belonged. Like I belonged working with women directly, working within their homes, supporting them to make choices, supporting them to have a birth however they wanted to have a birth. And yeah, so I guess it was just something that kind of came really naturally. And I worked at that hospital for a little bit longer while I kind of, I guess, prepared and set myself up. And then we moved back to Brisbane, or we moved to Brisbane. And that's also sort of in the same time frame that I started doing some part-time work for a private obstetrician. I was his midwife. And it was in that stage where midwives were beginning, or we were kind of allowed to apply for Medicare eligibility. So that meant that we became a Medicare provider. And that then allowed us to actually look after women directly and to be able to give them Medicare rebates. So at the time, when you were a private practicing midwife back then with Medicare eligibility, you had to have a private obstetrician to collaborate with. So they kind of had to give the sign off that you were okay, or that woman was okay to have a midwife. So I was really lucky. I was already working with a private obstetrician, and we had an incredible relationship, and we collaborated on everything, and he trusted everything I did. And so he said to me one day, "Do you want me to help you out with this? I'm more than happy to get you the Medicare eligibility that you need. I'll sign off with you." So I jumped at the chance. Absolutely. So when that happened, I then sort of continued sort of the process of setting up a practice, because there was a bit to happen behind the scenes. And I worked with the private obstetrician in sort of part-time as well. And I was still seeing all the women, and I was able to actually work with him and give those women Medicare rebates as well. So it was mainly for postnatal care. And then I kind of just made a leap. And I guess he kind of gave me the push. He kind of went, "Go and do it. Go and do it. You're going to be incredible at it. The women love you. You've got, my backing." And so I did. I kind of just started opening up the doors. I actually opened up the doors. It was in our house. It was in our downstairs lounge room. I'd actually kicked, Louis was a young teenager then. It was his bedroom, and I said, "You need to move, because I need to use this office," because it had its door to the front of the house. And yeah, so then, to be honest, Tess, I can't even tell you how it started, because
it was such a natural evolution.
And I think I might have put an ad in the paper and said I was a private midwife. But one thing that actually got people in my door, I actually put a sign out the front of our house, and I still have a photograph of that. And it actually said, because I called myself the Midwife Clinic, and it said private midwife, Medicare eligibility. And it was just this beautiful sign that I designed. And Darren said, "Sure, we can stick it up out the front." And people actually came and knocked at the door.
Started knocking on the door at all hours.
Literally knocking on the door. And women were just, because it was in New Farm and it was a really busy pathway where it was walk down to the powerhouse. And so people would just walk past, heavily pregnant women would walk past and kind of like double take and go, "What do you mean there's a midwife here?" So that's how it started.
How many years of your career were you a home birth midwife?
So I like to call myself a private practicing midwife. So not all of it was home birth, but I actually practiced as an actual home birth midwife for close to 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
But previous to that, obviously, when I was working with a private obstetrician, I still classified myself a private practicing midwife.
Yeah.
So around about 13 years all up.
Yeah. Wow.
As a private practicing midwife, but that sort of close to 10 years of sort of possibly right on 10 years of actually home birthing.
I actually have your book here with me. Anyone who's watching on YouTube can see. This is Midwife Crisis, From Trust to Trauma, which I have read. I actually read this really, really quickly, I think within a week.
Yeah.
I was very, very moved by a lot of the stories in here and a lot of the personal experiences, not just of yours, but of a lot of the women and families that you have worked with. And I feel like there is so much to unpack in this book. And I feel like it's such an interesting read for anyone. You don't have to be in this space. You don't have to be a midwife. You don't have to be a mum. It is absolutely eye-opening. What was the moment or the turning point for you that you were like, I need to put pen to paper and get this out there?
I think a lot of people had said to me during my years of midwifery, you should write a book. And a lot of that was prefaced with, you've got such incredible stories to tell. And I think a lot of people had assumed that if I was ever going to write a book, that I was going to write a book about the fairy lights and the unicorns. But when two events happened to me in my career, I made a decision that I wasn't going to write a book about fairy lights and unicorns of birth. I was actually going to write about the other side of the bed, and that being as the midwife, and what the midwife sees and what the midwife feels and what the midwife takes home with her every time an event like that happens. And also to tell my side of the story as well for each and every birth that I'd attended and the stories that I tell in those books. So the story really is about how I was treated in those environments, or how incredible those environments were, or what it kind of meant to me. And I know that there are lots of books out there about birth and about, people writing about beautiful birth stories, and birth is incredible. And I credit all my career to incredible women that I've watched birth and have had the privilege of being in their homes, particularly in their homes, watching them give birth. But the flip side to that is it's hard work, and it's hard work on our behalf, emotionally, physically, mentally, financially, because again, it's not necessarily a career that pays a lot of money. So you are working. You kind of have to double your caseload to make decent amounts of money in this kind of field. So, but of course, you don't necessarily go into these sorts of jobs for money. But writing the book to me was, again, it was more about being able to say what I had kind of, I guess, covered up for so long. And, I might have some days walked into the birth suite looking amazing and, wearing the nicest clothes and wearing the highest of heels and presenting myself in a way that, felt good to me. But internally it wasn't great. I would walk into those birth suites sometimes with complete and utter anxiety, my heart beating out of my chest, not knowing what I was walking into or not knowing what could possibly happen today. And particularly after when an event happens to you, or where you've been involved in an event, a tragic event, you live with that as well. And I guess I just didn't want to continue to live with that. So writing the book for me has been incredible therapy. And I've probably only ever really started clinical supervision, or, what would be classified as therapy, after writing the book. So
I think the biggest theme of the book would be the fact that the support for midwives just isn't there, and that it's overlooked of the emotional side and the deep personal side that it affects. Why do you think no one is talking about the toll that it takes on midwives?
Many healthcare professionals, we have the facade that we're supposed to be stoic and we're supposed to be, don't get emotional about this. If you got emotional about every birth or every time a baby passed away, how are you going to continue down in this career? So, and it's
very robotic, isn't it?
It's very robotic. I guess that's the issue. And that's, from what I can kind of understand in all my years of being a midwife, is that's what they want. They want the robots. And unfortunately, we may well be replaced in some, time, maybe not in my lifetime, that a robot will be delivering a baby. But
I hope I don't live to see that.
I hope I don't live to see it either. But I think a lot of it is about the emotion. A lot of it is about, being really strong, resilient. The hugest thing in healthcare and healthcare professionals is you need to be resilient. And to be honest, that's bullshit. Like, if you're not human and you don't feel something, then you shouldn't be in this industry, really.
Can you share maybe an experience or something, or even something from the book that can really make listeners understand some of the extremities of which you go through as a midwife and the kind of things that you're expected to face and expected to deal with and expected to make decisions with on the spot? What was it like working on the ground, let's start with in a hospital setting, I would say.
As an example, I'm going to pick COVID, right? I mean, COVID was bad for everybody, but for healthcare workers and particularly nurses and midwives, it was horrendous. So we were, first of all, as a healthcare worker, we were forced to have vaccinations, whether we wanted to or not. It was part of our requirements. It was part of us to keep our jobs, which is fine, and I don't have any issue with vaccinations, but there are many people who do, and their choices were taken away from them.
And I think it was more at that time, it was an unknown vaccine. I think that was the biggest concern for
unknown.
people.
Nobody knew what they were putting in their bodies. So, and again, also in the COVID environment, we were wearing head to toe PPE. So we wore a mask 24 hours a day. We wore N95 masks, which were made of the most horrendous chemical fabrications, cardboard that would basically break our noses off. The straps were so tight that they would leave indents on our faces. We would be, if you were on birthing suite for the day or you were allotted an induction for the day, you would go into that room and you weren't to come out until your shift ended. Drinking was a no-no. If you were lucky enough to get a break and go and have something to eat, then you could, you were one of the lucky ones. But doing that, and most of us got to a point where what's called donning and doffing your PPE was just a nightmare. It was painful. It was like, so in the end, most of us just went, forget about it. Let's not eat for an 8-hour shift. Let's not drink for an 8-hour shift. So many of us ended up with bladder infections or, angry, cranky, angry, hungry, angry, not.
And also
not
you can't focus in that kind of condition, when you're looking after your nutrition.
You're in a very high pressure environment too, and things go wrong, so, and inductions were rife at that time as well. Cesarean sections were, the cesarean section rate skyrocketed. So I guess COVID was probably one of the hardest, and particularly in my career as a midwife in a hospital, that was probably, and that was kind of at the height of my career in a hospital, that I had to work in there. And during COVID, I'd fought those 4 solid years of COVID. I did that. I guess one of the other things that not a lot of people see is the tragedies that happen, both women, what happens to families when a baby passes away, when a baby can't be saved, when a birth just doesn't go to plan. You end up with a very unwell baby or a very unwell mother. Again, there's not a lot of support for the practitioner, for the midwife during and after those events. And majority of the time, it's a bit like that happened, get on with it and come back to work tomorrow.
I was sick to my stomach and in tears when I was listening to you recounting one of the stories that I had read in your book, which was I think like the second kind of short ep that you had released on your podcast, I guess, sharing a little bit about what people could expect. And that was the story of a woman who basically wasn't listened to in the hospital room, and was basically getting forcefully intervened with to get her baby out, and you being there and advocating for her as her private midwife, getting completely overlooked and ignored by the doctors who were there on that day, and hearing the trauma that she went through and the way that she was supposedly screaming for them to stop, like literally brought me to tears. And I was just like, how how many stories do we have to hear? Because I'm not even in this space, and I have heard that many recounts of friends or friends of friends or just anyone, women who have had really horrific birth experiences. I'm like, what is going wrong in our system to be allowing for these experiences that are so traumatic for women? And I'm not trying to be negative towards the industry at all, but I just think seeing the amount of stories that are out there, there's something that's not right.
Yeah. It's birth trauma. It's birth trauma, and it's prolific. And there was an inquiry into it, particularly in New South Wales last year. And what came out of that inquiry is just beyond imagination. But yes, you are right. And that particular story, Ellie, I was her MGP midwife. So that was within the hospital. And yes, her birth was horrific. And it took me a long time to deal with that. What I saw, what I witnessed, and almost to a point what I blamed myself for because I couldn't stop it. And as a midwife, when you're in a midwife in those environments, you are the lowest denominator. Now, even though I've known that woman for 9 months, I met Ellie when she peed on a stick, right? So I've known her from the day she was pregnant to now. I mean, I still know her well now, you know, and her kids are sort of 3 and 4. I've delivered both of her babies or part of both of her births. So, yeah, so you become the lowest denominator. And the fight, sometimes the fight is too hard to have because I have no power in that. And I become overlooked and I become redundant. I think that was the word that I used in the book. I became redundant in that environment. They didn't listen to anything that I had to say about Ellie or her pregnancy or her background as well, and how important that was. That just, again, when births become an emergency or when somebody deems it as an emergency or they feel that it's necessary for them to intervene in that particular birth, then that's that they end up with blinkers on and they don't see anything else. And they don't see a woman screaming on a bed asking them to stop. And it becomes what we now coined as obstetric violence.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really quite full on.
It's very full on.
It's disheartening because it's like, if they're not listening to you, what hope does the woman have or the partner?
Yeah. And partners, unfortunately, are also pushed to the side. Partners, males, females, they don't really have a say either. And again, that used to really cut through me too, because again, this is the person that knows this woman the best. They know what she wants. They know where she's been. They know her life. They know her history. But yet, again, they become a redundant person in the equation.
I think, like, I had a doula at my birth and I was working with a private OB, so he was very aware of my wishes, and I'm very glad that he was an amazing obstetrician and very respectful of all my birth preferences. But having just that extra person to advocate for me was a game changer, especially when I needed an episiotomy at the end. I, had someone to fall back on to be like, is this time? Do I really need this? I think having that kind of person, having someone like yourself like there is so important for women, but it is scary that it can get to a point where sometimes even that is overlooked.
And even doulas, I've always worked with doulas and I love working with doulas all throughout my career, and I'm actually a guest speaker at the Australian Doula Conference this year, which is really lovely of them to invite me. But doulas also often get very, very badly treated in environments like that. And they often get a very bad name as well, which, again, I don't believe that every doula is, deserves that. But, yeah, I always, if there is someone that can support and advocate, and again, a midwife has this clinical skills, but she also has, the ability to support and advocate and educate. A doula, same thing. Doula is so powerful in that in that environment to be able to advocate for you and to support you in your choices as well.
So what about toward the end of your midwifery career? Can you tell us a little bit about what occurred that changed, I guess, the trajectory for you, and I guess everything for you? You go into it in great depth in the book. So I know listeners can go and read about it there, but would you be open to sharing a little bit?
Yeah. So I guess, again, going back to those COVID days, those kind of days that I was working in a major metropolitan hospital, I had worked really hard and I was tired and I felt like I was constantly battling and fighting for every single woman under my care. And it does get to a point where it is like, how much longer can I do this for? So I was probably at that point, not particularly recognizing it as burnout, but now that I know what burnout is, I kind of look back and I go, wow, you were beyond burnout. So I'm the kind of person in anything that I do, I'm 110%. Like I'll go to the next level. I'll do, things that aren't necessarily always a requirement of me. And I'll also, I've educated myself quite extensively. So in addition to my normal kind of requirements for what I'm required to do as a midwife, I've always gone beyond those things. So and that's part of my, part of my journey as a private practicing midwife. No one kind of hands you a silver platter and says, here, these are your competencies. These are your mandatory things that you need to do to work. But as a private practicing midwife, you have to find all of those things for yourself. You have to financially be able to support yourself to do that. So throughout my years, I became very well educated in breastfeeding. I did a certification in breastfeeding. I also did a certification in tongue ties. I came across a lot of families in my work as a private practicing midwife where breastfeeding became very difficult. And one of the issues with breastfeeding can be a baby that is tongue-tied. So I worked extensively while I was in Brisbane and in private practice. Through my home birth, I worked with a dentist who had some incredible skills and knowledge and background in tongue ties and releasing those. And
do we know what causes it, or is it just?
There's a couple of theories that cause it, and probably one of the the main theories is actually over supplementing through pregnancy.
Oh, interesting.
And not allowing the natural progression of some of the cells to develop. And some of those extra supplements can cause what we now define as midline defects in babies. So we're talking tongue ties, we're talking deviated septums, we're talking umbilical hernias, we're talking testicle issues, so hydrocele testicles or testicles that can contort as well through the development of the baby in utero. So sometimes overuse of supplements can do that. But yeah, so I had upskilled myself. I had, given myself a lot of experiences. I worked with a few dentists. I was trained quite extensively in tongue tie, and particularly in tongue tie releasing, and that is releasing with a very small, very sharp pair of scissors. There's a few dentists that will actually do it with laser, but that also kind of involves when they're talking about posterior tongue ties. I never really worked with posterior tongue ties, and if I did come across a baby with a posterior tongue tie, I would refer them on. But I had the ability to release tongue ties that were anterior. Long story short, I worked with a family who had a baby who had a very tight tongue tie anteriorly through her pregnancy. I was her midwife through her pregnancy, through her labour and her birth and her postpartum. I made a clinical decision to support her to cut that tongue tie. I had actually sent her off to other clinicians to have the tongue tie released. There were 2 clinicians, and again during COVID, who basically said they weren't doing it. The other 2 clinicians that she was referred to said that she didn't need it. Now, her baby was losing weight. There were some issues with her breasts at the time. She was constantly getting infections and mastitis, and I'd sort of worked with them extensively. And it was outside of my work with the hospital. I said to them, I can help you. I can support you. These are my credentials. I'm more than happy to support you, your choice. And so they made a choice that I was the midwife to do that for them. And I did it, no problem at all. Baby thrived after that. Breastfeeding went on beautifully. I think she could possibly, I think that baby would be close to 2 by now, but I know she breastfed that baby till he was about 1.5 with no further issues. Couple of weeks down the track, I was called into a manager's office and I was advised that I was going to be suspended from the hospital for a procedure that I did that was outside of my perceived as being outside of my scope of practice. So I obviously was devastated and confused, tried to have some conversations with some managers and some other people. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I was put on suspension for 14 days. I was working in a program where I had a midwife buddy and I was on call. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I was silenced. I was given basically, an ultimatum that if I spoke to anybody, I would be terminated. So I wasn't so silent, but I tried to keep it silent. I spoke to a couple of midwives about it. And, so after that, I was pulled into a meeting, a disciplinary meeting, and I was kind of told that I had to explain myself. I had to prove all my credentials, which I had proven all my credentials when I started at that particular hospital. They were completely ignored. So I proved the credentials again and they said, okay, well, we'll think about it. And by that stage, I was just in a state of disillusionment. I was distressed. I kind of made a decision that this wasn't a good place for me to be in, mentally, physically, emotionally. And I put in my resignation and said that I wasn't kind of going to continue down the path of them disciplining me. So after that, about 2 weeks after I made that decision, I received a notification from AHPRA. So AHPRA is our governing body, and the hospital had put in a notification against me. Because they couldn't control me, they decided that this was the best way to go. And I then had to fight that for 9 months. So I had to prove that I had the credentials, that it wasn't outside of my scope of practice, because they had said on that report that I had practiced outside of my scope of practice, which I hadn't. So again, I had to go through all the process of dealing with that and managing that, time, effort, everything else that went along with that. So once I got, and honestly, Tess, the worst part about this is that you do all of this work and you prove and you fight and you sit and you wait. You wait for them to make a decision. When they come back, they go, oh, it's no case to answer.
No case to answer?
No case to answer. So the end of my career as a midwife ended like that, or as a practicing midwife. And I just got to a point where I just thought, there's no care. And again, nobody checked in on me. Not one, not one manager, not one senior midwife. One of my caseload buddies checked in on me, but there were 19 midwives on that caseload and not one of them. And I just disappeared one day. And you would think that you'd go if you were working with someone for 4 years and all of a sudden she disappears. What's happened? Where is she? I had to lie. I was told by my manager at the time that I had to call in sick every day.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I'm not doing that.
No.
You can explain.
Surely that's not legal.
It's not legal. So, and then I wasn't paid sick pay for that either.
No.
And that's when I began. So the beginning of that book, when the first chapter is I sit and I wait. So that's the beginning, is I'm sitting and I'm waiting.
What do you think are the biggest systematical changes that need to happen, and what do midwives need most?
I'm going to start with that question. What midwives need most, and what I've learnt, is midwives need to be cared for. They need to be supported. They need to be looked after, and they actually need a system that actually cares about them as well, cares about their mental health, cares about their physical health, cares about their emotional health. And I know in the years that I practiced as a midwife, when I was not cared for, I was at my worst. And I know I made bad clinical decisions. And I know things happened because I was not in a good space mentally, physically, or emotionally. And I was burnt out. So I guess it's, when you are burnt out, you don't know it. I don't think you know when you're burnt out.
No.
And, I've, in the 9 months that I've been touring with the book, I've met a lot of midwives, and I've had lots of conversations with midwives, and so many of them say, and the words I hear the most are, I don't know how much longer I can do this for. Without support, without care. And a fish rots from the head down, right? So unfortunately, in environments like major metropolitan public hospitals, if we don't have people up the top who care, then it doesn't get filtered down. So you get, senior managers, senior clinicians, senior people that don't necessarily have that in the forefront of their mind, that the people that are on the floor actually need to be cared for, then that's where the problem lies. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't. But I think one thing to fix it is to put people who've done those actual jobs in those management roles and know that what it is to care, not someone who has a piece of paper that says that they've, got a leadership, but someone who actually knows what it's like to be a midwife on a floor doing a 18-hour shift.
Well, I think step one is sharing the stories and the experiences. Yeah. And I think with enough noise is when you can eventually get some change. But unfortunately, especially government boards are very slow to be responsive to these kinds of things. Yeah. But I'm very impressed by the work you're doing, getting your voice out there and trying to advocate for midwives, because they deserve it. They do. They're saving lives. They're bringing life into the world. And
it's not all doom and gloom. And we definitely have incredible, incredible days, and incredible births, and even you had an incredible birth, even though you had to have an episiotomy, that's still an incredible birth, and having the support that you had. And I watched you, grow in those very early days. And again, having support postpartum is another really, an incredible trait of a midwife, is if a midwife can actually work in that space and watch a woman grow, but also give her, the skills and the education that she needs. 100%. You're building incredible women, you're building incredible mothers into the world.
So with your experience working in public and private hospitals, and then of course a significant part of your career doing home births, how do you think that these environments differ in terms of like autonomy, safety, and then like satisfaction for both the midwife and the woman?
I think there's a lot more satisfaction in private practice, in particularly in home birth. I know I was very much satisfied in those environments, and going on that I had a lot of autonomy in that, or the autonomy was between the woman and I. And she would come to me and say, well, this is what I want, or, and I'd say, well, okay, that's fine. Let's do that. Let's work towards that. Obviously there are kind of, there are policies and there are procedures and there are things that even as a home birth midwife I need to follow, and I need to make sure that it's safe for this woman, and also on the flip side, safe for me. And I think the unfortunate thing is there's a lot of midwives, particularly private practicing home birthing midwives, don't necessarily see the flip side. Is this safe for me as well? And again, if I had my time, if I could rewind my time as a private practicing midwife in home birth, I would ask myself that question over and over and over again. Is this safe for me to do this?
I'd really love to delve into home births because I actually, funnily enough, really wanted a home birth for my first birth. Yeah. And everyone's like, oh, what? Wow. Wow. And it ended up not eventuating. Sean and I made the agreement that we would wait till maybe a second or third child. And you know what? I'm actually really happy we made that decision because I ended up feeling, I was really happy with my team. I ended up feeling very satisfied with the care that I had and being in that environment. And obviously as I progressed quite quickly, I think as a first-time mum, that felt really right for me after reflecting on it. But home birth is something I've always been very fascinated in, and I think it's bringing it back to the empowerment of the woman. Yeah. And I'm very, very big, and especially on this podcast, about empowering women. Yeah. I think for a lot of women out there, they unfortunately relinquish a lot of control, mainly because they think they can't. Yes. And I think that's a societal problem. I think that comes down to the language around birth. I think we are basically infiltrated that birth is so overwhelming and painful and extreme and risky and dangerous that we have this vision imprinted in our minds that we can't do it, that we can't handle the pain, that we're somehow not born to do it, and we somehow need someone to be doing it for us or telling us what to do. Yeah. And I just don't buy that. And I have no issue with women saying they want to get an elective C-section, but I think a lot of those choices come down to because they don't believe they can, and coming back to that empowerment. So I want to delve into home birthing a little bit because I know it is a really polarizing topic. I'm sure you're very familiar with that conversation being polarizing. What do you think are some of the biggest myths around home birthing that you believe aren't supported by evidence?
Well, you hit it first up on the head, like that I can't do it or I shouldn't do it for my first baby. And funnily enough, I used to have women who would come to my very first home birth clinic in my home, in my house, saying, maybe I'll do this for my second one. But I used to say to them, if you can get the first one right, your second and thirds and all the rest of your babies are going to be incredible. So let's give it a go. But the thing is about home birthing is it's not fast and hard has to be a home birth, right? And a good home birth midwife or a good home birth practitioner will make sure that you feel safe. And again, going back to that flip side of it, safe for the midwife, is that you have a hospital backup. You are educated in what could go wrong or what are the limitations of the midwife as well. And there are limitations for home birth. And that can be from a pregnancy point of view, when you're in labour, when you're giving birth, and or postpartum as well, in those very, very early, very kind of, precarious stages of postpartum as well. So there is definitely aspects of home birth that aren't right for everybody. And there would be people who would come and sit with me, and it wouldn't be from the beginning, but there may be weeks down the track or visit after visit after visit where I would probably go, do you know what? Maybe home birth isn't right for you or for us. Maybe we do need to plan to have this baby in a hospital. And sometimes that wasn't always because of the woman. And as you said, you and Sean, you wanted to have the home birth, but Sean sort of felt a little bit unsafe about that. And often that was a very common conversation between partners. And I would always encourage the partners to come. And at the beginning of my home birth, I would be going to their homes. So meeting them in their homes, doing all their antenatal care in their homes. So I was part of their family, part of their environment, and got to know them really, really well. So often, sometimes it'd be just those small comments that, the partner would make. And I would address that with them and make sure that they're feeling safe. And sometimes right up until the day of the labour and birth, the partners were still a little bit edgy about things. But as soon as everything went great and we had this incredible birth and everything, turned out beautifully, they'd be shouting it from the rooftops. They'd tell everybody how incredible it was. But yeah, look, I think home birth is very polarizing. and it isn't for everybody. But I do believe that if you have a very good practitioner, a very good midwife on your side, and someone who does know their limitations, then you're probably a pretty good candidate for it.
For someone that's listening that's like, I just don't get it. Why would you do a home birth when you can go to a hospital and you've got all the resources around you for anything that would happen? What would you say to this person? What are the pros? What are the positives that you've seen out of home birthing? Why did you fall in love with it so much?
I think it's exactly about that empowerment, and it's the woman's choice, her choice to do A, B, and C. It's also, and it seems really kind of, mediocre, but she doesn't have to leave the comfort of her own home. And I would always there would be people who'd be like, oh, but what about the mess? It's actually not that messy, to be honest. A lot of people sort of say about the mess, but it's not. And I agree about the drugs as well. Like, you've got everything at your hand. You've got, all the drugs, and you can have an epidural whenever you want to. But you can also have an epidural whenever you want to if you're choosing to have a home birth, but you'd have to transfer to hospital, right? So, and that's, I guess, the other aspect of that is that, again, if you have a very good practitioner, that practitioner has already set all of those things up for you. You've been very well educated. If I was going to give you the hospital versus the home, you're probably less educated in a hospital environment than you are in a home environment. So you also have your own midwife. You have that person that has known you from the day you've peed on the stick to, that actual moment that you're physically giving birth. That's trust. That's, empowerment. That is what we like to call continuity of care. And again, that midwife knows every single little thing about you. And she knows what ticks you, what, excites you, what kind of makes you kind of what fears you have as well. So she knows, and again, she will know those backgrounds of you. Whereas in a hospital environment, particularly a public hospital environment, you might see a midwife, you might see a different midwife every week of your pregnancy, even though that midwife is documenting, but they don't know you the way that a private practicing home birth midwife knows you.
And there is something so primal about it being in your own space. And obviously, being in the right headspace for birth is such a big thing. And I think that's why it was so prevalent for me, as I wanted to know what it was like to have control over my birth and really experience it, and really believe in myself that I knew it was something I could do. And having that in my home was something that to me, it just felt very innate. It felt very natural. And this is how it's supposed to be. I was born to do this. We're born to reproduce.
We're born to have babies.
Yeah. It's one of the most prevalent things of being a human being a mammal, a reptile, anything. It's so natural. And I think that's the conversation where it's been steered away. We're made to feel like it's not normal and it's not natural.
And our great-great-grandmothers were all born at home, So, there wasn't hospitals back then. Most people, anyone over the age of sort of 70 to 80 was possibly born at home. And look, it's gone through its phases, and I've seen, 25 years of that, the phases of the good and the bad, and, the pros and the cons, and the fight for home birth and the not so, fight for home birth. So look, I think it's very individual.
Yes.
It's very individual, and who chooses what. And again, I'm the type of midwife, and I guess because I've worked in all aspects of midwifery, from hospitals to, home birth, it's your choice.
Yes.
So if you came to me and I was your private practicing midwife, it's not a requirement for you to have a baby at home. You can choose. So I could still be your midwife, or once still could have been your midwife, to work with you in a hospital. So if you'd said to me, Tess, yes, I'm going to, you employed your doula could have stayed at home with you. and she's gone to the hospital with you, same as a midwife. She could have done exactly the same thing.
I think it gets a really bad rap, unfortunately. It was even like the devastating passing of that young 30-year-old woman in Melbourne who died of a postpartum hemorrhage after a home birth. But I think what kind of bothered me about the way that the media spun it was the fact that she didn't have a midwife with her. She had a doula. And there aren't the same credentials for a doula to a midwife. It's not a professional, and that's where the nuance in the story was. And I felt like that was very misleading because I didn't, you don't get that till the end of the article, and that's where I think home birth gets a really, really bad rap. And it's like being in a hospital or at home. It's about having the right team there.
And things still happen in hospitals, Unfortunately, babies die in hospitals. Women die in hospitals as well through childbirth. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to, eradicate death in childbirth or babies dying through labour and birth yet. But I agree with you and clickbait. I want to use that term, that the word home birth is splattered all over the media.
Yeah.
But yet, let me define the differences between home birth with a midwife to a free birth. So what she had was what's classified as a free birth, where there was no medical practitioner, there was no clinician. And as a midwife, you call yourself a clinician. And there was no availability of postpartum hemorrhage drugs. Now, if there was postpartum hemorrhage drugs, and I, as a private practicing home birth midwife, I have dealt with a lot of postpartum hemorrhages at home. Those drugs that we carry and those IV fluids save somebody's life. And I can tell you, I have dealt with 3-litre postpartum hemorrhages at home. But I've also transferred a woman to hospital with a 500 ml postpartum hemorrhage because that's what needed to happen. So, yes, it is unfortunately clickbait about that. And, yes, home birth does often get a very bad rap in the press, and it is the difference between – and even the Australian College of Midwives had to come out and say, we just want to clarify that was a free birth opposed to a birth with a private practicing midwife.
I'm glad you cleared that up because I know even from the conversations that I've had with people casually around it, it's been very like, this woman, and it is misleading.
Yeah. But it's their choice, right? It's everyone's choice. Of course. It's your choice to jump in your car today and go for a drive.
Yeah.
Now, you could still be hit by another driver and die. It's their choice. And I definitely don't condone them for making those choices. And people have free births. I know I've actually had 2 of my previous home birth clients have free births because they felt that they were so well educated. They felt, and I absolutely would support them to do that. But if I turned up to that house as a midwife, it's no longer a free birth. It's actually a home birth.
Yeah.
And as the midwife, and if something went wrong in that, then I'm responsible. So I guess, again, that's where that flip side of the safety aspect. So if I was a private practicing home birth midwife and turned up to that, if that doula had called me and said, I need your support, I would be the one that would actually suffer the consequences of that. Unfortunately, their family is now suffering the consequences.
It's just horrendous. Yeah.
And I'm so sad that has happened, and it should never have happened, but it does happen.
Also in the media a lot at the moment, as we've seen with the shift in American politics, has been a lot of talk about the current childhood vaccine schedule and obviously the recent removal of the hepatitis B vaccine to be administered at birth.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the removal, one, of the Hep B vaccine? And do you think that this space is going to continually be shifted over the foreseeable future?
I think vaccines shift and change all the time, Tess, and I think there's a lot of big pharma involved in that. There's a lot of money involved in that. And again, I think at the beginning of this podcast, we were talking about some of the things I'm as a registered health practitioner, I'm not allowed to have an opinion on that. I definitely have an opinion. I'm not necessarily allowed to publicly say that opinion. But I believe particularly the hepatitis B vaccine, was brought in, 15, maybe 17 years ago, really as an absolute requirement for babies in hospitals. I can tell you in home birth practices, it's very unusual to give a baby a hepatitis B vaccination.
Okay, interesting. It's so hard when I feel like, you want to say so much and you can't. It's a very, very interesting space. I find it the weirdest topic because it's like everyone wants to talk about it. It should be a choice and everyone wants to talk about it, but everyone's too scared about it. And if you do have an opinion on it, you're crazy or you could be anti-vax. And I just feel like it's so misconstrued. And I'm always for asking questions. So the whole podcast ethos is about getting curious and questioning things. So I do think it's good that, we are talking about it, but it is a shame. I think that this certain conversation in particular, it is so incredibly taboo.
Oh, rife, absolutely rife with taboo and with, again, everyone has an opinion, like everything, everyone's got an opinion on something. And unfortunately, when we're talking about vaccines, and I think because of the COVID pandemic,
it's shifted the conversation.
It really
for sure.
has shifted, and I'm not sure that if we hadn't had COVID, we might not be having this conversation.
I completely agree.
But look, I agree. Hep B it's a transmittable disease through adults. It's very unusual for a newborn to be exposed to it.
Yeah.
Unless there was
mother or someone.
Somebody who was capable of transferring that to a newborn. So,
while I've got your opinion hat on, let me ask you quickly about cesareans, because I feel like there is a growing conversation as well about the increase or the high rate of cesareans and whether too many are performed without maybe a clear medical need. What's your perception after working in the industry?
Again, I'm going to go back to it's a choice. It's everyone's choice to do what they want. And if a woman is making a decision about having a cesarean section for whatever reason, and there are many, many reasons why people have cesarean sections. I've met women who've had cesarean sections because of a medical problem. I've met women who've had cesarean sections because she's been sexually assaulted, and having a vaginal birth is so far beyond her capability of managing. I've met women who are choosing to have cesarean sections because they can choose the date and the time of the date, the time the baby's born. I agree that we do unnecessary cesarean sections, and I also think that our hospital system, particularly our public hospital system, does have a quota of medical procedures that need to happen, and cesarean section comes under that. And a hospital is a business, and how hospitals get paid is by doing particular medical procedures. So that could be.
Is it correct as well that the procedure is seen as a safer procedure than a vaginal birth?
Again, I think it depends on who you're talking to.
Right.
From medical professionals to women. Yes, some people would say that it is, but it's a wound. Like you're opening up your abdomen, you're opening up your womb. There's lots of risks involved. Some people are choosing to go under general anesthetics to have cesarean sections. So there's another risk having a general anesthetic.
I just feel like from anecdotally stories I've heard that a lot of between private OBs and also in public, it appears that there does often seem to be a push or a suggestion, which can happen for an array of reasons, such as a very minimal risk that's been picked up, such as one thing is, that breech babies, a lot of doctors are no longer educated to birth breech babies. So that's now out of the system. Yeah. But I've even heard stories about, women finding out that their OBs had a holiday planned and then being kind of encouraged to do a cesarean at an earlier date. Yes. I just feel like I've heard one too many stories that raise a few hairs.
a few eyebrows. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. And the holiday seasons are the worst. So around Christmases, around New Year's Eves, around Easters, around actual holidays is where we definitely see the increase in planned cesarean sections, not unplanned, but planned cesarean sections and inductions of labour. Because, yes, they can be done during daylight hours. And that is very helpful for a practitioner who, might only work 9 till 5. So that actually is very helpful for their practice. But I agree that there are women, again, who can make the choice. And again, for all sorts of reasons why. I'm definitely, again, I'm the midwife, again, that when I worked in a hospital, MGP environment, if I was your midwife, if I was your continuity of care midwife and you walked in my door and you sat down and you said, well, not having a vaginal birth, I'm having a cesarean section and I don't, and this baby's due on Christmas Day, so I want to have the baby on the 19th of December. Okay, let's do it. But let's educate you about that. Let me educate you about A, B, and C and risk 1, 2, and 3. And the fact is that if you have, if this is your first, then that's okay. Maybe your recovery will be okay. But if this is your second baby and you did have a very traumatic first vaginal birth, then that's okay too, and I get that. But remember, you have a toddler at home and you are going to have a wound for 6 weeks. And picking up a toddler and holding a newborn can be a little bit tricky, getting out of bed. Some women bounce back. Tess. Like there are some women I've watched and I've just gone, wow, like you've gotten out of bed. And it's only because they choose to do that or that they just have to do that. That's kind of what they do. But there are risks involved. There are I've seen plenty of cesarean section wounds break down. I've seen plenty of episiotomy wounds break down. I've seen, and again, the breech, you touched on the breech. What's really interesting about the breech movement now, particularly with midwives, particularly with home birth midwives, is they are upskilling themselves because there is not many practitioners left in hospitals that are skilled in vaginal breech births. So private practicing midwives, particularly home birth ones, are upskilling themselves. And there are some incredible breech practitioners out there teaching. We call it bring back the breech. So again, and they're happening at home as well. But again, these are very skilled, very professional, very knowledgeable, and also very limited. So knowing what their limits are, knowing that they have the skill to birth a woman in a breech with a baby in a breech position, but there are some requirements here.
I think you hit the nail on the head before when you said education. And I think that, full circles the whole conversation is that women should be supported in whatever decision they should and want to make. Midwives should be supported in every step of their career, but education is required to make women feel empowered, and education is required in the system to give midwives what they need. So I'm really grateful for you for sharing your story today and your pearls of wisdom. I'd love to get you back on for like a part 2 because I feel like there's so much knowledge that you have and from all the upskilling that you have done, from everything from safe co-sleeping to lactation and nurturing the mother. Like there is so much. And I know you are filled with all that wisdom and information. But I do love to end my episodes by asking our guests to leave a little verbal entry in the Tess Talks diaries. Do you have like a lasting piece of advice or wisdom that you'd like to leave with the listeners?
I guess I'd love to remind people that midwives in particular, because we're talking about midwives, are human beings. And we see, we hear, we witness, we take home the trauma as well. And we know that women experience birth trauma over and over and over again, but we also experience that. And particularly if you're a midwife who is ridiculously passionate about women's health, it can be really hard to turn that off. So I guess a piece of wisdom that I would love to leave for midwives or any other health practitioners is to look after yourself and to recognize that you are a human being and that you're actually a human before you're a midwife, or you're a human before you're a doctor, or you're a human before you're a health practitioner. So you have to look after yourself because you're the only one who's going to do that.
It's a very important message. Thank you so much, Kelli.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. If you loved the episode, please subscribe, rate and review. It honestly means so much and helps to keep these conversations going. And I'd love to connect with you. You can message me on Instagram or TikTok, and I've left all the details from the episode in the show notes below. I'll see you next week.